The transport shuttle's engines hummed to a halt as it settled onto the landing platform of the Galactic Defense Academy, its metal hull gleaming under the twin suns of Kepler 542b. Among the 100 new cadets disembarking, clutching their standard-issue duffel bags and wearing expressions ranging from excitement to terror, one figure moved with deliberate invisibility. Elena Vasquez kept her head down, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face as she shuffled forward with the crowd. While other students craned their necks to take in the massive crystalline spires of the academy, she studied her feet, counting steps. 30, 7 from the shuttle door to the processing station. She memorized everything: the slight tremor in the platform's deck plating, the way security personnel positioned themselves at 12-degree intervals, the escape routes visible through peripheral vision. "Next!" barked Sergeant Cornack, a 7-foot Altarian whose blue-scaled hide bore the scars of a dozen campaigns. Elena stepped forward, offering her identification crystal with a hand that appeared to shake from nerves. "Elena Vasquez, Earth Colony 7, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the processing center. Physical sciences track. Cornack's vertical pupils dilated as he scanned the crystal, his expression shifting from bored efficiency to mild surprise. Test scores, very high. Combat aptitude, declined to test. His snake-like tongue flicked out, tasting the air around her. Interesting. Elena's shoulders hunched further inward. I don't like fighting, sir. I just want to study." The Altarian's laugh was like grinding stone. "Academy will cure you of that weakness, little human. Report to Dormitory Block C, Level 7. Try not to get eaten by the Vorthan students. They smell fear." As Elena hurried away, Cornack made a notation in his datapad. Another soft human who wouldn't last a month. The Academy had a way of winnowing out the weak. Block C, Level 7 was exactly what Elena had expected. A sterile corridor lined with identical doors, each marked with room numbers in 6 different galactic languages. Her assigned quarters, C7, 293, contained 2 beds, 2 desks, and a small viewport showing the Academy's sprawling complex. She claimed the bed nearest the wall, farthest from the door, and began unpacking with methodical precision. Her belongings were unremarkable: basic clothing, standard academic supplies, and a few personal items that painted her as exactly what she appeared to be: a nervous girl from a backwater colony who had somehow tested high enough to earn admission. She arranged everything with careful attention to detail, each item placed not for convenience but for rapid access should circumstances require it. The door chimed, and Elena's roommate entered with a swagger that filled the small space. Zara Keth Voss stood nearly 6 feet tall, her Centauran heritage evident in the golden fur that covered her muscular arms and the predatory grace with which she moved. 3 parallel scars ran across her left cheek, ritual marks of the warrior caste. "So, you're the Earth Girl?" Zara announced, tossing her gear onto the unclaimed bed. "I heard Cornack laughing about you. Said you were afraid to take the combat trials." Elena ducked her head, her voice emerging as a barely audible whisper. "I'm Elena. I hope we can be friends." Zara's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Friends? This isn't summer camp, human. This is the Galactic Defense Academy. They don't coddle the weak here." She leaned closer, her amber eyes gleaming. "But don't worry. If you wash out in the first month, maybe they'll find you a nice safe job cataloging star charts somewhere." For the rest of the evening, Zara dominated the space with her presence, making vid calls to friends, exercising with equipment that clanged and thudded against the floor, and generally establishing herself as the room's alpha presence. Elena seemed to shrink into the background, occasionally glancing up from her studies with what appeared to be nervous admiration. The next morning brought orientation assembly in the Academy's Grand Hall, a cavernous space that could hold 10,000 beings. Elena found herself swept along in a river of cadets from dozens of species. The hulking Krathari with their stone-like skin, sleek dolphins in environmental suits, crystalline vorax that chimed as they moved. She ended up in the back section, squeezed between a group of boisterous Martian colonists and a silent pod of Tausetians. Admiral Thorne took the stage, her presence immediately commanding absolute silence. The veteran of 40 years of service bore cybernetic enhancements along her left arm and jaw, souvenirs of the Outer Rim Wars. Her voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, carried the weight of absolute authority. "You are here because you represent the best your worlds have to offer," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled cadets. Some of you earned your place through exceptional academic achievement, others through demonstrated courage in crisis. A few, her eyes seemed to linger on certain sections of the crowd, through qualities that have yet to be fully revealed. Eleanor shifted slightly in her seat, a movement so subtle it might have been mistaken for nervousness. In reality, she was calculating sightlines and noting the positions of security personnel stationed throughout the hall. The Academy will test every aspect of your being, Admiral Thorne continued. Your knowledge, your courage, your loyalty, and your ability to make decisions when lives hang in the balance. Many of you will fail. Some of you will discover strengths you never knew you possessed, and a rare few will prove themselves worthy of joining the ranks of those who guard galactic civilization against the darkness between the stars. The Admiral's presentation covered the Academy's history, its role in maintaining interplanetary peace, and the various career tracks available to graduates. Elena appeared to listen with the same nervous attention as every other first-year cadet, occasionally glancing around at her classmates with what looked like social anxiety. Classes began the following day with a brutal schedule that started at 0530 hours with physical conditioning and ended at 2200 hours with study sessions. Elena's academic track focused on theoretical physics, xenobiology, and technological analysis, subjects that allowed her to remain safely distant from the combat-focused curriculum that dominated the Academy. In advanced quantum mechanics, taught by Professor Veltar, a being whose species existed partially in another dimension, Elena occupied a seat in the middle of the room, close enough to hear clearly but not so close as to draw attention. When called upon, her answers were correct but delivered in a halting, uncertain manner that suggested good preparation rather than natural brilliance. Miss Vasquez. Professor Valtar's voice echoed from somewhere in the vicinity of what might have been his mouth. Can you explain the practical applications of quantum entanglement in faster-than-light communication? Elena's hands trembled slightly as she consulted her notes. Well, sir, when particles become entangled, measuring one instantly affects the other regardless of distance. So if you encode information in quantum states, you can transmit data faster than light. She paused, appearing to struggle with the concept. But you still need conventional communication to coordinate the measurements? Adequate, Veltar pronounced, his attention already moving to the next student. Elena seemed to sag with relief at avoiding further scrutiny. The pattern repeated across all their classes. In xenobiology, she provided textbook answers about alien physiologies while appearing slightly nauseated by the more graphic specimens. In technological analysis, she correctly identified the basic functions of various devices but claimed to find the more advanced applications too complicated to understand. Her classmates began to categorize her quickly. Marcus Webb, a cocky pilot track student from Lunar Base, dubbed her Library Girl, after she spent their first free afternoon reading in the archives rather than socializing. Kexani Thor, whose species valued aggression above all else, simply ignored her as beneath notice. Even the more academically inclined students like Yuki Tanaka found Elena too timid and self-effacing to be interesting company. Only one person seemed to take any real interest in Elena, and not in a way she appreciated. Cadet Commander Valdres Kane, a third-year student from the prestigious Centauri Prime military families, had been watching her with calculating eyes during mess hall meals and study sessions. Valdres was everything Elena appeared not to be. Confident, aggressive, and possessed of the kind of natural charisma that drew followers. His family had produced 5 generations of fleet officers, and he carried himself with the assurance of someone born to command. More troubling, from Elena's perspective, was his apparent intelligence. Unlike many of the other students who dismissed her as harmless, Valdres seemed to sense something beneath the surface. "You're interesting, Elena Vasquez," he said one evening, sliding into the seat across from her in the otherwise empty archive section. His voice carried the cultured accent of the inner worlds, each word precisely enunciated. Most students struggle with the transition to academy life. Homesickness, performance anxiety, social adjustment issues. But you seem comfortable, settled. Elena looked up from her quantum mechanics textbook, her eyes wide with apparent confusion. I'm sorry? I don't understand what you mean. Valdres smiled, the expression not reaching his pale blue eyes. Of course you don't. Just making conversation. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. Tell me about Earth Colony 7. I've never been to the outer settlements. It's very quiet. Elena stammered, her fingers worrying at the edge of her textbook. We mostly farm atmospheric processes and run mining operations. Nothing exciting. Nothing exciting, Valdris repeated thoughtfully. And yet they produced a student with test scores high enough to earn immediate academy admission. That's quite remarkable for a quiet colony. Elena's cheeks flushed and she gathered her materials quickly. I have studying to do. For tomorrow's examinations. Of course you do, Valdris said pleasantly, but his eyes never left her retreating form. The first month at the academy passed in a carefully orchestrated display of mediocrity. Elena attended every class, completed every assignment, and slowly built a reputation as a hard-working but unremarkable student. Her test scores were good but not exceptional, falling consistently in the upper middle range that drew neither praise nor concern from her instructors. But social isolation was equally calculated. She was friendly enough to avoid being labeled antisocial, but never close enough to anyone to invite deeper scrutiny. During group exercises, she contributed just enough to avoid criticism, while allowing more dominant personalities to take credit for successes. When conflicts arose between cadets, and they did, regularly, Elena was nowhere to be found. The Academy's social hierarchy established itself with predictable brutality. The children of military families, like Valdris Kanan Zara Keth Voss, formed the natural aristocracy. Athletes and combat prodigies occupied the next tier, followed by the academically gifted. At the bottom were the nervous, the weak, and the unlucky. Those who had somehow gained admission, but clearly didn't belong in such an elite institution. Elena appeared to occupy the lowest tier, invisible except when her roommate needed someone to blame for minor inconveniences or when other students required a safe target for minor bullying. She bore it all with apparent resignation, her shoulders permanently hunched as if expecting the next blow, but appearances can be deceiving. Late at night, when the dormitory fell silent and even the most dedicated students finally succumbed to exhaustion, Elena's true nature emerged. She moved through the darkened corridors like a ghost, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floors. Security cameras somehow failed to capture her passage, their fields of view experiencing momentary blind spots or technical glitches that the maintenance staff attributed to the Academy's aging infrastructure. Elena mapped every inch of the facility with meticulous care. She noted guard rotations, identified security vulnerabilities, and catalogued the personal habits of every instructor and administrative staff member. Her actual quarters, hidden behind a false panel she had installed in her dormitory room's wall, contained equipment that would have impressed intelligence operatives from any of the major powers. The Academy's computer network, protected by encryption that had withstood attacks from the galaxy's most sophisticated hackers, yielded its secrets to Elena's touch like an eager lover. She ghosted through classified files, personnel records, and strategic databases, always careful to leave no trace of her presence. What she learned painted a picture far different from the Academy's public image. The Galactic Defense Academy was indeed training the next generation of military and political leaders, but it was also serving as a recruitment ground for something else entirely. Scattered throughout seemingly innocuous files were references to Special Projects Division, deep cover operations, and individuals who graduated from the Academy only to disappear into classified assignments that officially didn't exist. Elena had expected as much. Intelligence agencies throughout the galaxy had long used prestigious institutions as cover for recruitment and training operations. What interested her more were the patterns she detected in personnel assignments, the subtle networks of communication that connected certain faculty members, and the way information flowed through channels that didn't appear on any organizational chart. Someone was running a very sophisticated operation from within the Academy, using it as a base for activities that went far beyond its educational mandate. More concerning was the growing evidence that this operation had connections reaching into the highest levels of galactic government. Elena found traces of communications with Senate defense committees, fleet procurement officers, and diplomatic missions on frontier worlds where conflicts regularly erupted. The Academy wasn't just training defenders of galactic civilization. It was actively shaping the conflicts they would be called upon to resolve. As her second month began, Elena noticed changes in her environment that confirmed her suspicions. Certain students began receiving private instruction in advanced leadership techniques that weren't listed in any curriculum. Faculty members held meetings in secure conference rooms that required biometric authentication to enter. And most tellingly, security protocols throughout the facility quietly increased, With additional surveillance equipment installed in areas that had previously been considered routine educational spaces, something was building toward a crescendo, and Elena suspected she was running out of time to complete her mission. The organization that had sent her to infiltrate the academy, an entity so classified that even Elena knew them only by coded identifiers, had been very specific about their intelligence requirements. They wanted to know who was really running the academy's covert operations, how extensive their network had become, and what their ultimate objectives might be. More importantly, they wanted Elena to be in position to act when the time came. Elena's handlers had chosen her for this mission with exacting care. Her backstory was perfect. A genuinely brilliant student from a remote colony whose academic achievements provided natural cover for academy admission. Her psychological profile suggested someone intelligent enough to succeed academically, but too introverted and anxiety-prone to pose any security threat. Even her appearance supported the deception. She was small, unremarkable, and possessed of the kind of forgettable face that security personnel would struggle to recall even moments after interaction. What the Academy's security apparatus couldn't know, was that Elena Vasquez had been trained from childhood by some of the most dangerous people in the galaxy, her parents. On Earth, Colony 7 had been deep cover operatives whose mission required them to maintain false identities for over a decade. Elena had learned to speak 17 languages, disable security systems, and kill silently with improvised weapons before most children learned to ride bicycles. The organization that had raised her existed in the spaces between governments, operating according to principles that few civilians could comprehend. They were neither heroes nor villains in any conventional sense, but rather the shadow guardians who prevented conflicts from escalating to extinction-level events. Sometimes that meant eliminating threats through surgical violence. Sometimes it meant gathering intelligence to prevent wars before they began, and sometimes it meant placing their most valuable assets in positions where they could influence events at critical moments. Elena was one of their most valuable assets, and the Galactic Defense Academy represented the most important assignment of her young career. Part 2. The Transformation. The morning of Elena's third month at the Academy began with news that sent ripples of excitement through the student body. Admiral Thorne announced during the daily briefing that the Academy would be hosting the annual Galactic Defense Symposium, a gathering of military leaders, government officials, and defense contractors from across known space. For 3 days, the Academy would become the center of political and military power in the galaxy. This represents an unprecedented opportunity, Admiral Thorne explained to the assembled cadets. You will have the chance to interact with fleet admirals, planetary governors, and the architects of interstellar policy. Many of you will find mentors and future career opportunities through these connections. Elena listened to the announcement with the same nervous attention she displayed in all public gatherings. But internally, her mind raced through the implications. The symposium would bring together exactly the kind of high-level targets her organization needed to understand. More importantly, it would force the Academy's covert operators to reveal themselves through their interactions with their true masters. The preparation for the symposium transformed the Academy into a hive of barely controlled chaos. Additional security personnel arrived daily, not just standard military guards, but intelligence operatives whose movements and behavior patterns Elena recognized from her training. Private communications networks were established using equipment that didn't appear in any official manifests. And most tellingly, certain students began receiving special briefings that prepared them for roles that went far beyond simple cadet interactions with distinguished visitors. Elena's academic track provided perfect cover for observing these preparations. Her theoretical physics studies required her to spend long hours in the research laboratories, spaces that happened to be adjacent to several secure conference rooms. Her xenobiology projects took her to remote sections of the Academy where sensitive equipment was being installed. And her reputation as a harmless, anxious student meant that busy staff members barely noticed her presence. 3 days before the symposium, Elena made a discovery that changed everything. She had been conducting routine surveillance of Professor Veltar's laboratory, using specialized equipment to monitor electromagnetic emissions that might reveal the nature of classified research projects. The professor's partial existence in another dimension made conventional observation impossible, but Elena had developed techniques for detecting the unique energy signatures associated with interdimensional technology. What she discovered was that Professor Veltar wasn't conducting research at all. He was operating a sophisticated communication array that connected directly to fleet command networks across the galaxy. The quantum mechanics coursework was elaborate camouflage for intelligence-gathering operations that violated every treaty governing academic neutrality. More disturbing was the realization that Velta had been using his dimensional abilities to observe students and faculty without detection. Elena's own activities, carefully hidden from conventional surveillance, might have been compromised from the beginning. That evening, Elena made a decision that violated every principle of deep cover operations. She broke protocol and initiated contact with her handlers using emergency procedures reserved for missions in immediate danger of exposure. The response came 18 hours later, embedded in routine academy communications using encryption methods that required Elena to solve complex mathematical proofs to decode. The message was brief and unequivocal. Mission parameters unchanged. Maintain cover at all costs. Critical intelligence indicates Symposium is cover for Operation Starfall. Prevent at all costs. Elena had never heard of Operation Starfall, but the reference to prevention rather than intelligence gathering meant her mission had just shifted from passive observation to active intervention. She was no longer at the academy just to learn what the conspirators were planning. She was there to stop them. The next 2 days passed in a frenzy of preparation that tested Elena's ability to maintain her cover identity. She attended classes as normal, displaying the same nervous diligence that had characterized her first months at the academy. She completed assignments, participated in study groups, and endured her roommates' increasingly aggressive behavior with apparent resignation. But during every free moment, Elena accelerated her intelligence gathering with desperate intensity. She installed monitoring devices in key locations throughout the academy, using technology so advanced that it would be invisible to conventional security sweeps. She mapped communication networks, identified key personnel, and began developing contingency plans for scenarios ranging from targeted elimination to wholesale facility destruction. The equipment Elena required for these preparations had been pre-positioned throughout the academy by advance agents, hidden in locations that her handlers had identified months before her arrival. A loose floor tile in the physics laboratory concealed electronic surveillance devices. A modified atmospheric recycling unit in the lower levels contained weapons and explosives. Even her dormitory room's ventilation system had been altered to provide access to specialized gear. Elena's transformation accelerated as the symposium approached. She began spending her nights in intensive preparation, practicing combat techniques that she had learned in childhood but never expected to use. She reviewed architectural plans, studied personnel files, and developed detailed profiles of every individual who would be attending the symposium. The physical changes were subtle but significant. Elena's posture began to shift from the hunched defensiveness of a nervous student to the controlled readiness of a predator. Her movements became more efficient, more purposeful, though she was careful to maintain her clumsy, anxious facade during public interactions. Most telling was the change in her eyes. They began to carry a coldness that was quickly hidden whenever others looked directly at her. Zara noticed the transformation first, though she interpreted it incorrectly. "You're finally growing a spine, library girl," she commented one evening as Elena returned from what appeared to be a late study session. "About time. Maybe you'll actually survive your first year." Elena looked up with apparent surprise, her expression returning to its familiar mask of nervous uncertainty. I don't know what you mean." "I'm still the same person." "No," Zara said thoughtfully, her predator instincts detecting something her conscious mind couldn't identify. "You're definitely not the same person. You're walking differently, talking differently, even sleeping differently. You don't toss and turn anymore." For a moment, Elena felt the temptation to drop her cover entirely. Living a false identity for months was exhausting in ways that physical combat could never be. The constant performance, the deliberate incompetence, the enforced social isolation, all of it wore at her psychological foundations like water-eroding stone. But she had been trained for this kind of pressure from childhood. Elena forced her shoulders to hunch, her voice to waver with uncertainty. I've been taking confidence-building courses, online tutorials. I thought maybe if I could be braver, people might like me more." Zara's expression softened slightly, her aggressive nature responding to what appeared to be vulnerability. "That's actually not a terrible idea. Just don't try to change too fast, okay? People notice when you suddenly start acting different." "I'll be careful," Elena promised. And she meant it in ways her roommate could never understand. The symposium began with a grand reception in the Academy's main hall, the same space where Elena had first heard Admiral Thorne's orientation address. The transformation was remarkable. Elegant lighting, sophisticated decorations, and formal dress uniforms created an atmosphere of power and prestige that spoke to the event's true significance. Elena attended the reception in her role as a student volunteer, helping with registration and crowd management duties that made her effectively invisible to the distinguished guests. Her assignment placed her near the main entrance, where she could observe every arrival while appearing to focus on mundane logistical tasks. The guest list read like a catalogue of galactic power. Fleet Admiral Corzon of the Altarian Defense Forces, whose strategic genius had ended 3 separate interstellar conflicts. Senator Valdez from the Earth Coalition, Chairman of the Senate Defense Committee and architect of humanity's military expansion. Director Vash of the Centauri Intelligence Service, a woman whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary throughout the civilized worlds. But Elena's attention was drawn to the less obvious attendees, individuals whose names didn't appear on any public guest lists but whose presence indicated the symposium's true nature. Corporate executives from weapons manufacturers, intelligence operatives from governments that officially maintained peaceful relations, and most intriguingly, a small group of individuals whose biometric signatures didn't match any records in galactic databases. These unknown guests moved through the reception with the confidence of people accustomed to operating in shadows. They spoke quietly to key military leaders, exchanged coded pleasantries with government officials, and demonstrated familiarity with Academy personnel that suggested long-standing relationships. Elena memorized every face, every conversation fragment, every subtle interaction that might reveal the conspiracy structure. Her training had prepared her to absorb vast amounts of information while maintaining perfect situational awareness, and she used every skill her handlers had taught her. The breakthrough came during the reception's second hour, when she observed Director Vash of Centauri Intelligence having what appeared to be a casual conversation with Professor Veltar. Elena was too far away to hear their words, but she could read lips in 17 languages and observe micro-expressions that revealed emotional states. What she saw chilled her to the bone. Director Vash was discussing operational timelines and resource allocation with Professor Veltar, treating the Academy's faculty member as a subordinate in an intelligence operation. More disturbing were the references to final phase implementation and elimination of obstacles to galactic stability. Elena began to understand the true scope of what she faced. Operation Starfall wasn't just another intelligence operation or military conspiracy. It was a coordinated effort by multiple governments and organizations to reshape the political structure of the galaxy through methods that would make previous conflicts seem like minor diplomatic disputes. The Academy wasn't just providing cover for recruitment and training. It was serving as the command center for an operation that would affect billions of lives across dozens of star systems. As the reception continued, Elena observed similar conversations between other unlikely pairs. Military officers spoke with corporate executives about production schedules that didn't match any public contracts. Government officials discussed territorial adjustments that assumed conflicts that hadn't yet begun. And threading through all of these interactions was a network of Academy personnel who clearly served roles that went far beyond education. Elena's handlers had been correct to classify this as a critical mission. Operation Starfall represented exactly the kind of shadow conspiracy that their organization existed to prevent. The challenge was determining how to stop something this large and complex without causing the very destabilization it was apparently designed to achieve. The reception ended with Admiral Thorne delivering a speech about the Academy's role in preparing future leaders for the challenges ahead. Her words carried double meanings that Elena now understood with perfect clarity. "The galaxy stands at a crossroads," Admiral Thorne declared, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Traditional approaches to maintaining peace and stability have proven inadequate in the face of emerging threats. The time has come for bold action, decisive leadership, and the courage to make difficult choices for the greater good." The applause was enthusiastic, but Elena noticed which guests responded with particular fervor. The conspiracy's membership was revealing itself through their reactions to coded language that promised actions ordinary citizens would never suspect. As the evening wound down and guests began departing for their quarters, Elena maintained her position near the entrance, ostensibly helping with coat retrieval and transportation coordination. In reality, she was conducting final observations that would inform the decisions she would need to make in the coming hours. Elena now understood that she faced an impossible choice. Her original mission had been intelligence gathering, with the understanding that any direct action would be conducted by other operatives at a later time. But the scope and timeline of Operation Starfall meant that waiting for backup was not an option. Whatever the conspirators planned to implement during the symposium needed to be stopped immediately. even if that meant exposing her cover and sacrificing her position within the academy. The young woman who had arrived at the academy 3 months earlier as a nervous student from a backwater colony was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Elena Vasquez had completed her transformation from frightened girl to apex predator, and she was preparing to remind everyone who had underestimated her why that had been a fatal mistake. The next morning would bring the symposium's main sessions, where the real business of conspiracy would be conducted behind closed doors and under heavy security. Eleanor would be there, no longer as an observer but as an active participant in events that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Her handlers had trained her for this moment from childhood, but they had also taught her that the most dangerous enemy was the one who appeared harmless until it was too late to defend against them. Elena had spent months perfecting that particular deception, and now she was ready to demonstrate why appearances could be so very deceiving. The symposium's second day would prove that the most dangerous predator was often the one that looked like prey. Part 3. The Revelation. The second day of the symposium dawned with artificial precision, the Academy's environmental systems adjusting lighting and atmospheric conditions to optimize alertness and productivity. Elena reported to her volunteer duties with the same punctual reliability she had maintained for 3 months, but everything else about her had changed in ways that only the most observant would notice. Her assigned station was in Conference Room Alpha 7, a secure facility that would host the day's most sensitive discussions. Elena's official role was technical support, managing presentation equipment, distributing materials, and ensuring that distinguished guests had everything they needed for productive deliberations. In reality, she was positioned perfectly to observe and record the conspiracy's operational planning session. The room gradually filled with individuals whose public personas masked their true roles in Operation Starfall. Senator Valdez entered with his usual political confidence, greeting colleagues with the practiced warmth of a career diplomat. Director Vash arrived separately, her cold efficiency unchanged by the previous evening's revelations. Fleet Admiral Corzin brought his tactical genius and a reputation for making hard decisions in impossible circumstances. But it was the entrance of the unknown guests that confirmed Elena's worst fears. These individuals, whose identities remained classified at levels that suggested involvement with organizations even more secretive than Elena's handlers, took positions around the conference table that indicated they were not merely observers but active participants in whatever was about to unfold. Admiral Thorne opened the session with security protocols that would have impressed intelligence agencies across the galaxy. The room was sealed against electronic surveillance. Communications were disabled except for emergency channels, and biometric scanners confirmed the identity of every individual present. Elena's false identification held up to the scrutiny, her nervous student persona providing perfect camouflage for someone who posed no conceivable threat to galactic security. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed colleagues, Admiral Thorne began once the room was secured. We gather today to finalize plans that will reshape the balance of power in our galaxy. Operation Starfall represents the culmination of years of careful preparation and strategic positioning. Elena continued arranging presentation materials while recording every word through devices that her handlers had designed to be undetectable by conventional security sweeps. What she heard in the following minutes confirmed her handler's worst fears and revealed the true scope of the conspiracy she had been sent to investigate. Operation Starfall was not a military campaign in any conventional sense. Instead, it was a sophisticated manipulation designed to trigger a series of conflicts that would destabilize existing governments while positioning the conspirators to provide the solutions that desperate populations would eagerly accept. The Academy served as both command center and training ground for the operatives who would execute various phases of the plan. Phase 1 is already complete, Director Vash reported, consulting notes that suggested months of preparation. Our operatives have been placed in key positions throughout frontier governments, corporate hierarchies, and military commands. They are prepared to initiate the cascade scenarios on command. Senator Valdez took over the briefing, his political expertise evident in his analysis of potential consequences. The beauty of this approach is its deniability. Each conflict will appear to arise from legitimate grievances and existing tensions. No single government or organization will be able to trace the instability back to coordinated manipulation. Elena felt her blood chill as she understood the implications. The conspirators weren't planning to conquer the galaxy through military force. They intended to cause such widespread chaos that existing governments would collapse, creating opportunities for new power structures that they would control from behind the scenes. Fleet Admiral Corzon outlined the military dimensions of the operation with the same clinical precision he brought to legitimate strategic planning. Phase 2 requires careful timing to ensure that conflicts escalate beyond local containment capabilities. Our embedded assets will ensure that peacekeeping forces arrive too late or with insufficient resources to prevent wider destabilization. The unknown guests finally spoke, revealing accents and terminology that Elena didn't recognize from any known civilization. Their involvement suggested that Operation Starfall had dimensions that extended beyond the galaxy's established political structures, possibly involving entities that had remained hidden from public awareness. Resource allocation for Phase 3 has been confirmed, one of them stated in a voice that carried undertones Elena couldn't identify. Reconstruction contracts have been pre-arranged with appropriate distribution of profits to ensure continued cooperation from necessary parties. Elena realized she was observing the planning session for the largest and most sophisticated conspiracy in galactic history. The participants weren't terrorists or revolutionaries driven by ideology. They were calculating professionals who viewed entire star systems as pieces on a strategic game board. Admiral Thorne resumed control of the briefing, her authority absolute even among such prestigious company. Execution begins in 72 hours with simultaneous incidents in the Vega system, the Centauri trade routes, and the Outer Rim territories. Each operation has been designed to appear unrelated while creating cumulative pressure that will overwhelm existing crisis response capabilities. The presentation continued with detailed operational plans that demonstrated years of preparation and resources that could only have come from the highest levels of multiple governments. Elena memorized every detail while maintaining her facade of nervous student diligence, occasionally refilling water glasses or adjusting projection equipment in ways that provided better angles for her concealed recording devices. As the morning session concluded, Elena understood that she faced a crisis that exceeded her training and experience. Operation Starfall was too large and too advanced for any single operative to stop through conventional means. The conspiracy involved individuals and organizations with access to resources that dwarfed anything her handlers could deploy in response. But Elena had not been trained to give up in the face of impossible odds. During the lunch break, while the conspirators moved to a secure dining facility, Elena used her volunteer access to return to Conference Room Alpha 7 alone. She had approximately 30 minutes to complete actions that would either save galactic civilization or result in her capture and almost certain death. Elena's transformation accelerated beyond anything her handlers had anticipated when they designed her cover identity. The shy, anxious student disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who moved with lethal efficiency and absolute focus. She retrieved specialized equipment from hiding places throughout the room, devices that had been pre-positioned by advanced agents who had anticipated the need for emergency intervention. Her first priority was communication with her handlers. Elena activated a quantum entanglement transmitter that would instantly alert her organization to the scope and timeline of Operation Starfall. The information she had gathered would allow them to begin countermeasures, though she suspected their response would come too late to prevent the initial phase of the conspiracy. Her second priority was more immediate and infinitely more dangerous. Elena began installing explosive devices throughout the Academy's critical infrastructure, not enough to cause catastrophic destruction, but sufficient to disrupt the symposium and prevent the final coordination meeting that would authorize Operation Starfall's execution. The irony was not lost on her. Elena had spent months observing and learning about her targets, becoming intimately familiar with their routines, their relationships, and their vulnerabilities. Now she was using that knowledge to destroy them, employing the very skills they had failed to detect beneath her carefully constructed facade of harmlessness. Elena's work was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside. She immediately shifted back to her cover identity, gathering presentation materials and assuming the nervous posture that had served her so well. When the door opened, she was surprised to find Cadet Commander Valdris Kana entering alone. "Elena," he said pleasantly, his pale eyes taking in every detail of her appearance and position. "I was hoping to find you here." "Oh!" Elena exclaimed, her voice carrying perfect notes of surprise and mild anxiety. "Commander Kane, the presentation materials needed to be reorganized for the afternoon session. I hope is that acceptable?" Valdris moved into the room with casual confidence, but Elena noticed that he positioned himself between her and the exit. His smile remained friendly, but something in his posture suggested predatory interest rather than casual encounter. "You've been very dedicated to your volunteer duties," he observed, circling around the conference table in a way that maintained his blocking position. I've been watching you work and I have to say you're remarkably thorough. Elena felt a chill of recognition. Valdris had detected something about her true nature despite her careful performance. The question was how much he suspected, and whether he represented an immediate threat to her mission. I just want to do well, she replied, allowing her voice to waver with uncertainty. Everyone here is so accomplished and I'm nobody special. I don't want to disappoint anyone. Nobody special, Valdris repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting. Most people who are nobody special don't have the kind of academic credentials that earned you immediate academy admission. They also don't move with the kind of controlled precision you've been displaying lately. Elena's mind raced through possible responses while her body prepared for violence that seemed increasingly inevitable. Valdris had clearly been observing her more carefully than she had realized, and his current behavior suggested he represented a threat that required immediate neutralization. I don't know what you mean, she said, taking a half-step backward that brought her closer to where she had concealed emergency weapons. I'm just trying to be more confident, like my roommate suggested. Your roommate? Valdris said with a laugh that carried no warmth. Zara Keth Voss, whose family has produced military officers for 6 generations. Do you know what's interesting about Zara? She's been reporting on your behavior to Academy security since your 2nd week here. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Her roommate, who she had dismissed as a simple-minded bully, had been conducting surveillance throughout their entire cohabitation. Elena had been so focused on external threats that she had missed the danger sleeping 3 feet away from her every night. But that's not the really interesting part, Valdris continued, his casual tone contrasting sharply with the danger he represented. The really interesting part is that Zara's reports described someone completely different from the person I've been observing. According to her, you're a nervous, clumsy girl who cries herself to sleep and jumps at shadows. But that's not what I see when I watch you. Elena realized that her cover was blown, but she couldn't determine how much Valdris actually knew about her true identity and mission. His questions could represent genuine suspicion or sophisticated interrogation techniques designed to elicit information. Either way, she needed to end this conversation quickly and return to her primary mission. I should get back to work, she said, moving toward the door with what appeared to be nervous haste. The afternoon session starts soon, and I need to make sure everything is ready. Valdris moved to block her path with fluid grace that revealed martial arts training far beyond standard academy curriculum. When he smiled, Elena noticed that his canine teeth were slightly too sharp, and his pupils contracted in a way that suggested non-human heritage carefully concealed by cosmetic modification. I don't think you understand, he said, his voice dropping to a tone that carried undertones of genuine menace. You're not going anywhere until we finish our conversation. You see, Elena, I know exactly what you are. The moment of truth had arrived earlier than Elena had anticipated, but she was prepared for it. The transformation from nervous student to lethal operative completed itself in the space between heartbeats, her posture shifting to combat readiness, and her expression hardening into something that would have terrified the classmates who had dismissed her as harmless. Really? She replied, her voice suddenly carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized it for months. And what exactly am I, Cadet Commander? Valdris's smile widened, revealing those predatory teeth in their full glory. You're an assassin. A very good one too, judging by how completely you fooled everyone else. But you made one crucial mistake. What mistake was that? Elena asked, though part of her attention was focused on calculating distances to weapons and escape routes. You assumed that everyone at this academy is what they appear to be, Valdris said, just like you assumed that Operation Starfall is what it appears to be. Elena felt the foundation of her understanding shift as she realized that the conspiracy she had been investigating might be even more complex than her handlers had suspected. Valdris's words suggested layers of deception that went beyond the military and political manipulations she had observed in the morning session. You have approximately 30 seconds to explain what you mean, Elena said, her hand moving toward concealed weapons with obvious intent. Before I decide that you represent an unacceptable threat to my mission. Valdris laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement rather than menace. Your mission is to stop Operation Starfall, correct? To prevent a conspiracy that would destabilize galactic civilization through coordinated manipulation and controlled chaos? Elena's silence was answer enough. What if I told you, Valdris continued, that Operation Starfall is not the real conspiracy? What if I told you that it's elaborate theater designed to flush out exactly the kind of shadow organizations that sent operatives like you to infiltrate the academy? The implications hit Elena like a cascading avalanche of realization. If Valdris was correct, then she had walked directly into a trap that had been designed specifically to capture agents from organizations like her handlers. Operation Starfall might be nothing more than sophisticated bait in a much larger game. The people in that conference room this morning, Valdris explained, are playing roles designed to convince infiltrators that they've discovered a galaxy-spanning conspiracy. The unknown guests are actually intelligence operatives from various governments who volunteered to participate in this deception. Even Admiral Thorne's presentation was scripted to provide exactly the kind of evidence that shadow organizations would find impossible to ignore. Elena felt the careful structure of her mission collapsing around her. If Valdris was telling the truth, then every piece of intelligence she had gathered was part of an elaborate deception designed to expose the very organization that had trained and deployed her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because," Valdris said, his expression becoming serious for the first time in their conversation, "the real conspiracy is much worse than anything Operation Starfall pretended to be, and we need your help to stop it." Elena realized that her mission at the Galactic Defense Academy was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The shy student who had arrived 3 months earlier was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that the most dangerous threats often came from the least expected directions. Elena had learned to become whatever the situation required, and now the situation required her to become something she had never been before, a willing participant in a conspiracy that might be the galaxy's only hope for survival. But first she needed to understand exactly what she was being asked to join and whether the price of participation was worth the potential salvation it offered. The transformation was complete, but the real battle was just beginning. As Elena stared at Valdris Kana, she realized that her handlers had been correct about one thing. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. She had destroyed the weak, frightened girl who had arrived at the academy, replacing her with someone capable of making the hard choices that galactic survival might require. The question now was whether that transformation would be enough to face the challenges that lay ahead. Elena Vasquez, the shy student from Earth Colony 7, was gone. In her place stood something infinitely more dangerous, a predator who had learned to perfect the art of appearing harmless until the moment she chose to reveal her true nature. The academy had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was, one her instructors never intended, that the greatest weapon was often the one that remained hidden until it was too late for enemies to defend against it. Elena had become that weapon, and now it was time to discover what targets truly deserved her attention. The galaxy would never be the same.